June 5th, 1956. A late-night TV host laughed at Elvis Presley's hip-shaking live on air, calling it childish gyration. Millions watched as the joke landed and the audience roared. But Elvis didn't storm off or argue. What he did next, right there under the studio lights, made America fall silent and changed television forever. June 5th, 1956, NBC Studios, New York City. The stage smelled of hot cables and hairspray. Cameras the size of refrigerators hummed beneath ceiling lights that burned like miniature suns. Behind the curtain, Elvis Presley waited, tugging once at the cuff of his blue jacket, whispering to himself, "Don't freeze now, boy. Outside." On West 49th Street, a crowd packed the sidewalk 10 deep. Taxi horns blared. Fans clutched homemade signs. "Elvis the King. Shake it again, Elvis." Inside, nearly 200 people filled the studio audience. They fanned themselves with cue cards, sweating under the lamps. NBC announcers counted down from 5. Elvis's band tuned behind him. Bill Black on bass, Scotty Moore on guitar, DJ Fontana tapping a snare with nervous fingers. The host, Milton Berle, paced near the curtain, cigar in hand, rehearsing lines that weren't in the script. "We'll have a little fun with the kid," he told a producer. "America needs a laugh." Elvis heard him. He smiled tightly, but said nothing. The red light blinked on. Burley strutted onto the stage to thunderous applause. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "the boy who makes parents nervous and teenagers scream, Elvis Presley!" The curtain whipped open. Elvis stepped into the light. For a moment the sound hit him like a wave. Screaming, whistling, stamping feet. Flashbulbs burst from every corner. He grinned, pointed toward the drummer. "Hound dog," he mouthed. The riff cracked through the room. Elvis moved without thinking. A shoulder roll, a half turn, a flick of the leg. The crowd shrieked. The cameras zoomed close. Each motion looked bigger, wilder, rawer, on black and white TV. Halfway through the song, something happened. He stopped pretending to be careful. He let the rhythm take him. His knees bent, hips swung, voice rough as gravel. Mothers watching at home gasped. Teenagers cheered. When the last note hit, he froze mid-pose, mouth open, sweat glistening under the lights. The audience exploded. Backstage, producers panicked. One shouted, "Cut to commercial!" Too late. America had already seen it. Elvis jogged off stage, laughing, heart pounding. He grabbed a towel, wiped his face, and asked Scotty, "Too much?" Scotty smirked. "Too much for who?" But across the studio, Burley was shaking his head, grinning for the cameras. He whispered to an assistant, "We'll get a laugh out of those hips yet." Elvis didn't hear him. He was still catching his breath, unaware of the mockery waiting around the corner. A producer handed him a bottle of cola. "Great show, kid," he said, though his eyes said, "What have we just done?" Elvis leaned against a prop wall, listening to the muffled applause fade into chatter. Somewhere, a phone rang off stage. NBC switchboards already lighting up with complaints and praise alike. He smiled to himself. Guess they felt it. The floor manager approached. "Berle wants you back for a skit later in the show." Elvis nodded. "All right, whatever he wants." He didn't know that whatever he wants would become the moment the world turned on him, and then turned back. As the house band struck up another tune, Elvis straightened his tie, unaware that somewhere in the control room, the host was planning a joke that would echo through history. The laughter hadn't started yet, but it was coming, and when it did, the king would answer it without a single word. The second half of the Milton Berle show was meant to be light comedy, sketches, quick laughs, and one last song. The audience had no idea the next few minutes would turn Elvis Presley into both a scandal and a legend. When the cameras came back on, Berle was standing center stage, still grinning from ear to ear. "Well, folks," he said, "that was quite a performance." The audience laughed, unsure whether to clap or cringe. Elvis was waiting just off stage, towel around his neck, half listening. Berle motioned toward the curtain. "Bring that boy back out here." The crowd cheered again. Elvis stepped into the light, smiling politely. He thought they wanted a bow. Instead, Burl spun toward him, exaggeratedly twisting his hips, mimicking the dance that had just stunned the nation. The audience burst into laughter. Burl grabbed his tie like a mic and sang mockingly, "You ain't nothing but a hound dog," his voice squeaky and nasal, shaking his legs like jelly. The laughter grew louder. Elvis froze. For a moment, it was like he wasn't there, just a punchline, a spectacle. The crowd laughed at the imitation, not realizing the man they were mocking was still standing under the lights beside him. A camera operator muttered, "Oh man," under his breath. Burl winked at the audience, twisting his hips again. "That's how you do it, right, son?" Elvis didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. The laughter began to sound different, meaner, thinner. Charlie Hodge, waiting in the wings, clenched his jaw. "You gonna let him clown you like that?" he whispered, when Elvis stepped off stage. Elvis took a deep breath. "Let him have his joke," Charlie frowned. "You sure? That man just turned you into a cartoon in front of 40 million people." Elvis looked at him, calm, unreadable. Sometimes silence says more. Back on stage, Burl was still laughing with the crowd, unaware that the cameras had just captured something bigger than a joke. The world's first public embarrassment of a superstar. By the time the show ended, half of America was talking. Some called Elvis a disgrace. Others said he was fearless. But everyone had an opinion. The next morning, newspapers called it Elvis's vulgar TV debacle. Columnists mocked his wiggling hips. One pastor said, "He's corrupting youth, and now even adults laugh with him." Elvis read the papers in silence, his breakfast untouched. Charlie slammed one down on the table. "They're eating you alive, man." Elvis just smiled faintly, then let him choke. That night, as he walked alone through Times Square, giant billboards flashed around him. Pepsi, Camel, NBC. Every screen seemed to carry his name. He stopped outside a diner window, watching the reflection of the televisions inside replay the same moment. Milton Berle swinging his hips, the crowd roaring. Elvis whispered to himself, "They're laughing now. Let's see how long that lasts." He took a deep breath, straightened his jacket, and made a quiet promise. He wouldn't fight with words. He'd fight with sound. 2 days later, he called his band. "We're going back on that stage," he said. Charlie blinked. "You serious?" After that, Elvis nodded. "Yeah, but this time no moves, no jokes, just the music," Charlie hesitated. "And what if they laugh again?" Elvis looked straight at him. "Then they'll have to laugh through a prayer." The next appearance was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Same studio. Same cameras, same crowd, but this time, when he walked out, the man who once made America laugh would meet a silence that no one could ever forget. 2 nights later, June 7th, 1956. The neon sign of NBC Studios buzzed against the humid New York night. Inside, the same studio that once echoed with laughter now felt like a courtroom. Producers whispered. Cameramen adjusted lenses. Reporters leaned forward in the press box. They were all waiting to see if Elvis Presley, the boy mocked on live TV, would fight back. Elvis arrived alone, guitar in hand. No entourage, no jokes. Just his worn instrument and the small silver cross his mama had given him. Charlie met him at the stage door. "You really gonna do this quiet?" Elvis smiled. Sometimes quiet shakes more walls than noise. He walked through the corridor, past framed photos of comedians and crooners. Each smile on the wall seemed to ask, "You sure you belong here, kid?" The floor manager stopped him. "Network says no hip movements. Keep it family friendly," Elvis nodded politely. Wasn't planning on moving. At 8:03 p.m., the red light above camera 2 blinked on. Milton Berle stepped out first, grin a little tighter than last week. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice trembling just slightly. He's back by popular demand. The one, the only, Elvis Presley. A strange hush rolled through the room. Applause started. Hesitant, polite. Elvis stepped out, black shirt open at the collar, guitar hanging low. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at the crowd like he could see every doubt written on their faces. He adjusted the mic. This one's for the folks who think I only know how to shake. A few people chuckled nervously. Elvis closed his eyes. Let's show him the other side. Then, silence. He strummed the first soft chords of Blue Moon. His voice filled the air, tender and trembling. No swagger, no rhythm, just raw emotion, like someone singing to ghosts. Every word echoed in the rafters. Blue Moon. You saw me standing alone. The studio audience leaned forward. Some clasped their hands. Even the stage lights seemed to dim. In the control booth, a producer whispered, "Keep the camera tight on his face." Burl watched from the side, lips pressed thin. He couldn't look away. When the song ended, Elvis didn't move. He let the silence linger, thick, sacred. No one clapped, not yet. It was as if the whole room forgot what applause was. Then softly, one person started. Then another. Within seconds, the audience rose to their feet. The sound built like a wave. Not screams this time, but something purer. Respect. Elvis nodded once. "Thank you," he said quietly. He could have left right then, but he wasn't done. He shifted the mic slightly and added, "And if you were waiting for the hips, maybe next time, listen to the heart instead." The crowd erupted again. Burley stepped forward, awkward smile on his face. "Elvis, son, that was—" Elvis extended his hand. "Thanks for having me back." "Mr. Burl." Burl shook it, eyes glassy. The kind of look a man gets when he realizes he just witnessed something bigger than television. As Elvis walked off stage, Charlie caught up to him. "Man, you didn't say a thing to him, but you said everything." Elvis chuckled softly. "Ain't that the point?" Behind them, the audience was still applauding. The same people who'd laughed just days before. By morning, the press would call it Elvis's Quiet Rebellion. And somewhere in the NBC control room, a tape operator labeled the reel. June 7th, 1956. The night silence won. Sometimes the loudest retaliation is none at all. Sometimes stillness can shake the world. The next morning, New York woke up to something it hadn't felt in a long time. Silence, no laughter, no scandal headlines, just the echo of a voice that had cut through the noise. June 8, 1956, NBC replayed the clip. The country watched Elvis Presley stand perfectly still, singing like a confession on national television. Newspapers called it unnerving, too intimate, too human. For once, America wasn't laughing at him, they were listening. At a diner in Brooklyn, a waitress stopped pouring coffee when she saw the rerun. "He looks different," she whispered. A man at the counter muttered, "Never seen him stand that still before." In living rooms across the country, teenagers leaned closer to the screen. The parents who'd once called him a disgrace suddenly didn't know what to say. Backstage footage later surfaced, shaky black and white film from an NBC stagehand's camera. It showed Burl watching from behind the curtain, cigarette trembling in his hand. The smirk was gone. That clip would become infamous, the moment the comedian realized his joke had turned into history. Elvis, meanwhile, was already on a train to Memphis. No entourage, just Charlie, a guitar, and a bag of letters from fans. One letter stood out, written by a 16-year-old girl from Ohio. It said, "You looked like you were singing for something bigger than us. For once, my daddy didn't change the channel." Elvis folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. "That's the one," he murmured. Back in New York, NBC's switchboard flooded with calls. Viewers demanded reruns. Sponsors who once threatened to pull out were now offering bonuses. The performance everyone thought would bury him had resurrected him. By the weekend, Variety ran the headline, Elvis silences critics, captivates America. Milton Berle requested a private meeting. 2 days later, Elvis walked into a small lounge behind Studio 6B. Burley stood by the piano, hat in his hands, humility replacing the bravado, kid. He said quietly, "I owe you an apology." Elvis shrugged. "Ain't nothing to apologize for. You did what you do." "I just did what I had to." Burl nodded. "You taught me something. Sometimes a joke's just noise until someone answers it with truth." They shook hands. No cameras, no scripts. Just mutual respect between two showmen who'd finally understood each other. That night, Elvis walked to the edge of the East River, the city lights rippling across the water. He pulled out that letter again, read it twice, and smiled. Charlie joined him, holding 2 bottles of cola. "You realize you just changed TV, right?" Elvis grinned. "Didn't mean to change TV. Just wanted to change the tune." He leaned back, listening to the faint hum of the city. Car horns, laughter, radio static. Somewhere in that mix, he could hear his mother's voice singing an old hymn. Sometimes the world needs to be shocked quiet before it can really hear. Within a week, every major network invited Elvis back. Some wanted another song, others wanted interviews. But he said no. "Let the silence breathe," he told RCA. "Let folks miss the sound a little." That decision, to wait, became one of the smartest moves of his career, because when he finally returned a month later, the world wasn't laughing, judging, or mocking. They were waiting, and when he opened his mouth again, every note carried the weight of that silence. A single performance had turned the boy scandal into a man the nation respected. One fan later wrote, "He didn't just sing that night. He grew up on live television." Decades later, producers still replay that footage when they teach broadcasting history. The freeze frame. Elvis standing under the hot lights, eyes closed, a mic trembling in his hand, became one of the most studied images in pop culture. The night laughter stopped was the night reverence began, and somewhere between the two, a legend was born. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. Newsstands sold out before noon. Headlines shouted, "Elvis redeems himself, the king of control." From scandal to soul, the same TV critics who mocked him a week earlier now called him a performer with rare grace. America had never seen anything like it. A man rise above ridicule by standing perfectly still. Elvis sat in a quiet diner in Midtown Manhattan, a newspaper folded beside his plate. The waitress recognized him instantly but didn't scream. She just smiled softly and said, "You sure can hush a crowd, mister." He nodded. Sometimes that's the point. That afternoon, NBC invited him to return for a follow-up special. RCA executives rushed to capitalize on the moment. They wanted fire, not calm. "Kid, we need the hips back," one of them insisted. Elvis shook his head. "Not tonight. Let him remember the stillness." He looked out the studio window. Outside, teenage girls pressed their faces to the glass, holding homemade signs that read, "We believe you." The label didn't understand it, how silence could sell records. But Elvis did, because silence had turned into power. 3 days later, Burley appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. When asked about the controversy, he said something that surprised everyone. "That boy taught us more about dignity than half of Hollywood ever will." Those words hit every front page. The laughter that once haunted Elvis's name now turned into admiration. Across the country, letters flooded into RCA's mailroom. Some from pastors, some from parents, many from young fans. One read, "He didn't fight back, but somehow he won." Inside Graceland, Gladys Presley wept reading that one. "You see, baby," she told reporters, "he learned that from his daddy." Elvis took those letters everywhere. They became his quiet trophies, proof that grace could travel farther than anger ever could. By late July 1956, his next record broke sales expectations. Concerts sold out weeks in advance. But this time, something had changed. When Elvis performed now, he added moments of calm between songs. A short pause, a quiet breath, a whisper into the mic. The crowd noticed. They leaned closer, holding their breath, waiting for the next word. He had discovered something few entertainers ever learn: control through restraint. During one show in Little Rock, Arkansas, fans began chanting, "Dance, dance!" Elvis smiled, raised a finger to his lips, and whispered, "Listen." Then he sang, "Love Me Tender," without moving a muscle. The entire stadium went silent. When the song ended, there wasn't cheering. There was awe. That bootleg recording still circulates today. You can hear the faint hum of the mic, the soft gasp of 10,000 people realizing they were witnessing something sacred. Even his bandmates noticed the shift. Scotty Moore once said in an interview, "It wasn't just about music anymore. Elvis had learned how to make a crowd feel without touching a thing." That moment marked a transformation, from entertainer to artist, from spectacle to soul. Still, Elvis never forgot the night of the laughter. He kept a framed photo from that first Burley show in his dressing room. Written across the bottom in his handwriting were 4 words: "Don't confuse noise for meaning." Whenever a show started getting too wild, he'd look at that frame and nod, grounding himself before stepping into the spotlight. Years later, in 1960, when a reporter asked him about that infamous night, he smiled faintly. "I didn't silence anyone," he said. "I just gave them something better to listen to." That quote would appear decades later on a bronze plaque outside NBC Studios, June 7th, 1956, the night the King stood still. The same stage that once rang with laughter became a place of reverence, because sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't rebellion. It's stillness, and that stillness changed everything. New York City, 1987. 31 years had passed since that black and white broadcast. The NBC building had changed, the faces behind the cameras replaced by younger hands. But one reel, labelled June 7, 1956, the night silence won, still sat in the network vault. That year, technicians restored the footage for the first time. When they pressed play, the hum of old film filled the control room, grainy images flickering to life. Elvis Presley, 21 years old, standing still under blinding lights, eyes closed, microphone trembling. No one in that room spoke until the final frame cut to black. One of the engineers whispered, "That's how you freeze time." Word spread fast. NBC re-aired the performance on its 1987 anniversary special. Within minutes of broadcast, phone lines jammed again, just like they had 3 decades earlier. Teenagers who had never known him sat quiet, watching a man who didn't flinch when mocked, who answered humiliation with art. At Graceland, fans lit candles by the gate. Someone left a small plaque that read, "He stood still, and the world moved." Inside the Presley archives, Charlie Hodge, older now with silver in his hair, held that same framed photo, the one with Elvis's handwriting scrawled across the bottom. "Don't confuse noise for meaning." He smiled. "You kept your promise, brother," he said softly. The clip became a teaching tool in film schools and broadcasting classes. Professors paused the moment right before Elvis sang, telling students, "Here's what courage looks like on camera." Even comedians referenced it. The night a man refused to let ridicule define him. One network memo from that era still survives. It reads, "Viewer response unprecedented. Audience reports emotional silence following performance." The quiet became its own kind of applause. In 1990, NBC placed a bronze marker in the studio lobby. June 5-7, 1956, the night laughter met respect. Every year on that week, fans gather there. Some wear vintage jackets, some carry guitars. They play his songs softly, not the wild rock hits, but the ballads, "Love Me Tender," "Blue Moon," "Peace in the Valley." They say it feels like church. The original camera used that night is still displayed in the museum below. A note beside it says, donated by NBC television, used during the broadcast that redefined live performance. When tourists watch the footage, many think it's the ending of something, the moment Elvis stopped dancing, but those who look closer know better. It was the beginning of something far deeper, a shift from noise to meaning, from fame to legacy. A journalist once asked a young musician visiting the exhibit, "Why does this old clip matter so much now?" He answered simply, "Because everybody gets laughed at for trying to be themselves. He showed us how to stand still and keep singing anyway." Maybe that's why the story endures. It isn't about hips or headlines, it's about grace under fire, the power to choose silence when the world demands a fight. Even now, when that performance plays on the anniversary stream, the crowd watching from Times Square falls quiet. The city that never stops talking holds its breath for exactly 2 minutes and 37 seconds, the length of Blue Moon. And when the final note fades, someone always whispers, "Long live the king." Because that night in 1956 wasn't just a TV moment. It was proof that dignity can outshine mockery, that stillness can roar louder than applause. Sometimes the strongest sound in history is silence. If this story moved you, share it with someone who's ever been mocked for being different. Because Elvis showed the world that grace doesn't mean weakness. It means strength without noise. Maybe the next time someone laughs at your rhythm, you'll remember the night a man stood still and turned silence into a standing ovation.